Well, howdy, howdy. Phil here from the Blue Envelope channel. Well, I figured since it's getting towards the end of 2024, it would be a good time to do a check-in on Stephen Lett and his side hustle, which is real estate with his family. Last did a video on this about 4 years ago, and so we're due for an update, I think. Now, that last video has all the nitty-gritty, so feel free to check that out. I'll link it in the description. But just to very briefly recap, Steve Lett is from a family of 4, his parents, Mark and Jean, and then he has a younger brother, Tim. Here's a news segment about his brother Tim from 2019 when a restaurant that Tim owned in Alabama burned down. Sorry if my voice sounds a little different. Kind of caught a cold while I was making the video.
Owner Tim Lett giving us a tour of the place when it first opened.
This is from the 1960s. And this one is from around 1910.
The relics, which stayed when the new business took over, now ash.
So I'm still in shock, I guess. I'm thinking how tomorrow it'll be all like it was, but.
Looking on as it burned, Lett tells us the restaurant itself isn't without a story. He spent almost 18 years building it, mostly by hand.
These were logs I'd pulled out of the bay back 25 years ago now.
The iconic juniper wood log frame serving as fuel for the fire.
I had approximately $1 million worth of contents with the antiques, and I found out I got like 200,000 coverage,
A substantial loss not only for Lett, but for the community, who grew to love the restaurant that served up a side of history too.
And in the 1970s, in the build-up to 1975, they were all special pioneering, as many witnesses were. And then once 1975 came and went without Armageddon, Steve kept special pioneering and eventually went into the circuit work, and then from there eventually to the governing body. But for his brother and his parents, once 1975 passed, they kind of called it a day on the pioneering, moved back to Alabama, and started a real estate business. And they were actually very successful at it, and there's more details in the other video. And what you see looking at the paperwork is that while Steve didn't live down there, his family did try and keep him kind of involved in the business, evidently kind of a close-knit family. What I'm guessing is that, Steve was kind of sacrificing for Jehovah by being in the circuit work, and his family kind of felt that they would support that sacrifice by keeping him involved and benefiting from the family real estate business. Now, what's interesting is that even after Steve was appointed to the governing body in 1999, he continued his involvement after that in the family real estate business. So let's look at a couple of key documents that we went over in the last video. Okay, so this is the first document, and don't worry, I'll show in a minute, show you how to find these documents. So this is the first one from the other video. This is in 2013, and it's showing that Tim and Steve and his wife Susan went in 50-50 on buying this property on the water down there for $500,000. And if you look in the second paragraph there, it's actually 2 lots 1 and 2 in Lagoon Park. So we'll come back to that later. And then if you look here on the second page, so this is actually an installment sale. So if you have people that aren't financially in a situation where they need to deal with mortgages, an installment sale is kind of a nifty thing. And it's like the name implies that the buyer will pay in installments over a number of years. So it's kind of nice for the buyer because they don't have to come up with the full lump sum all at once. And then it's actually pretty good for the seller because it usually ends up meaning they pay less taxes, and because instead of getting a lump sum all in 1 year, the payments are spread out over a number of years. So we can see here Tim and Steve had 10 years to pay off the purchase amount. And then on the last page, it has a little diagram of the property that they bought. So you can see the water line at the bottom, and then it's 2 narrow lots next to each other. The lot 2 on the right has a house on it, and then the lot 1 does not have a house on it. And then just to kind of close the loop on that property, this is a paper from 2013, which is just saying that the Letts paid off the full $500,000. So they own it free and clear now.
And you can see that dated there June 9th, 2023. Okay, and then this is the second purchase document that we went over in the last video. In 2019, the Letts bought some more property down there from the same woman, just right by the other property lots they bought. So this one they paid $60,000 for. It's a piece of land with no buildings on it so far. And same deal, 50-50 ownership between Tim Lett and then Steve and Susan Lett. And if we look on page 2, it's the exact same terms. They have 10 years to pay off the $60,000. Okay, so that's that. Now let's move on to the new documents. I know a lot of witnesses watching are skeptical of these things, and ex-witnesses too, me included, which is a good thing, I think. So I just wanted to start right from scratch of how to find these documents yourself so you can check them out. So if you go to Google, and we'll just type in Baldwin County, Alabama property search, which is where Tim lives, and then just hit the first link there, and you'll get this site, and then just go to property searches there in the middle. Okay, and then it'll pull up this site, and then you can just go down and type in Lett, hit enter, and now you see all the properties owned by Letts in Baldwin County. I'm just going to expand it to more records there. And now we can scroll down to, here we go. So there's Tim, Stephen, and Susan. So we'll click details. And we get this record. Okay, so what we're looking at here is that second property they bought in 2019. And it's actually just an empty, it's just a piece of land right now. There's no house or anything on it. But you can see appraised at $62,000, so basically what they paid for it. And then if you click View Map under the picture there, you'll get to this site. And just click on the part here to make it bright. And yeah, so the one so it's the piece of property right in the center there that's kind of highlighted rose colored. That's what the Letts own, as you can see there if you just click on it. And so let me just zoom out a little bit here. Okay, so you can see, so here's this Lagoon Baptist Church, which is kind of a landmark we'll use. So the property is just east of that. And then if we go down, so there's the church. So just below the church is this property with the brown roof at number 50 there. And if you click on that, this is the other property that the Letts bought in 2013, and they sold it, as we shall see. So actually, let me just switch. I had Google Maps pulled up just to get a sense of where we're at. So this is the southeast United States. There's Florida, the Panhandle. Okay, there's New Orleans. So right in between Louisiana and Florida, Alabama has just a little section of Gulf Coast real estate. So you can see Destin there, and then here's Pensacola, and then the state line is kind of right, it follows up this waterway, and so Pensacola is on one side, and then Gulf Shores, where we're at, is just on the other side of the state line. So you can kind of see what it looks like here. So there's the actual waterfront strip, which is all the beachfront stuff, and then there's this lagoon behind it, and then the properties we were looking at are just on the other side of that lagoon. So let me just switch to satellite view so you can see all the nice looking beaches there, and then we'll zoom into the Lagoon Baptist Church here. All right, so where we see to the right is that empty property they own, and if you just go below the church, so we kind of cross this 180 Fort Morgan Road, and then there's the other property that the Letts owned, this house with the brown roof and the little pier there. Interestingly, it pops up that at least on this page, the person there is a realtor, which
So I'm curious if it was like a buddy of Tim Lett's or what the scoop is. But all right, let's go back to the other page. So if we, if you click on the lots, this page pops up. And so if you just go to more details, then this other page will pop up. And so this is so recall when they bought that 2013 property for $500,000, it was a lot 1 and 2 together. And so this is the lot 2 of that purchase. And as we'll see, it was sold in last year in 2023. Total appraised value $663,000. Kind of shows the house details there. One thing you notice, it was remodeled in 2022, so that would have been by Tim Lett. All right, and then if you go into deed search here, that will pull up the actual sale documents. All right, and if you just click on the names here, Charles Kirk, you can get the actual papers, which are kind of small. Let's see if we can zoom in a little more here. All right, so you can see the date in the top right, July 19th, 2023. We see Tim Lett there and the buyer there. And here it mentions Stephen and Susan Lett. And they sold this lot for $650,000, and they were paid $15,000 right off the bat. And then the buyers basically have 5 years to pay the rest of it. As you can see there, they just have to pay the interest technically. And then if we go to page 4, you can see the signatures of Steve Lett and Susan Lett and Tim there. You can see it was notarized in Orange County, New York, which is where Warwick Bethel is located. And then Tim signed his in Alabama, of course. Okay, so that's the one lot. Now let's go back to the other lot. All right, so this is it's all one property basically, but technically it's considered 2 lots. So this is just the land right next to the house, and you can see there appraised value $250,000. And then so if we go into the deed search for this one, we'll get the paperwork. Okay, and we click on the names again. And same deal. We'll zoom in a little bit. All right, so this one has Mark Stephen Lett listed there first. So he's actually a junior. Mark Jr., he goes by his middle name. You can see the address there, 40 Kings Drive, Tuxedo Park, which is where Warwick Bethel is. And this piece sold for $290,000, and the buyers paid $85,000 at the time of purchase. So basically they paid $100,000 total, and then same deal on this one. They have the 5 years to get it all paid off. So we see that there. And yeah, it's the same deal there.
Okay, so when we do the math, Tim and Steve paid $500,000 for this waterfront property, and then they got that paid off in 2023. And then at that point, they were able to sell it, so they sold it for $650,000 plus $290,000, so for a total of $940,000.
Oh my!
Not too shabby. And as we see, it was an installment sale, just like they did when they were buying the property. So they received $100,000 in 2023 as the down payment. And then in 2024, they received another $100,000 in guaranteed payments. And then the buyers have 5 years to pay off the rest, the remaining $740,000, which if you average it over the next 4 years would be an income of about $185,000 a year. And also there's the 4.5% interest, which depending how fast they pay it off would be about another $30,000 a year. So when you split it 50-50 between Tim and Steve, Steve will be grossing about $100,000 a year between 2023 and 2028. Not too bad, considering he really doesn't have any living expenses being there at Bethel. Now, I don't know how Tim and Steve do things. Maybe Steve just leaves all the money down there with Tim in Alabama so he can use it to buy another property and kind of start the whole process over again. Or, I don't know, maybe Tim cuts Steve a check each time they receive a payment from the buyers. Not sure on that one. For me, there's a few questions that arise that I'd be interested to get answers to. The first one, why is Steve involved at all in the family business? And I get that Tim wants to support Steve in his full-time service, but I mean, if Tim wanted to, he could just send Steve money. He could just send him $100,000 every year. I don't quite understand why Steve and his wife Susan are actually involved as co-owners in these properties in Alabama. That's a little puzzling to me.
What bad quality was developing in Barak's heart that Jehovah saw? Greed. And the Insight book defines greed as inordinate or rapacious desire. The dictionary says it's a selfish, excessive desire for more of something such as money than is needed. So in effect, Jehovah was telling Barak, stop being greedy. And in extended application, Jehovah tells us the same thing.
Another question I have, why is Steve storing up treasures on earth where moth and rust consume? I mean, presumably he believes he's going to heaven in the next 2 years, either after his death or by being raptured if he's still alive when the Great Tribulation starts. But either way, why does he feel the need to amass almost $500,000 over the next few years?
What's the lesson? We need to use our assets, our material assets, in a way that makes friends with Jehovah and Jesus. That results in something good. And we notice there in verse 9, it says, when these fail. It doesn't say if. And we realize as Jehovah's servants that eventually the commercial systems of this world will fail. Whatever money we have, whatever assets we have, it's just like this steward. They don't really belong to us, and soon we're not going to have them to use. So surely we would want to use them to Jehovah's praise and to make friends with Jehovah.
So obviously we have to fight hard against the spirit of the world so that we don't allow it to nurture greed in our hearts. In fact, if we're not careful, our love for Jehovah could be squeezed out by love for money and love for material things.
As we mentioned, between what all Bethelites receive for, food and shelter, and then on top of that, the special perks of international travel and other things like that Steve receives as being a governing body member, and then on top of that, the green handshakes of witnesses giving him cash and other valuable things, there's really zero need for Steve to store up a big balance in his bank account. So another puzzling thing to me.
What would you say is the antidote that can immunize us against the poison of greed? Well, is it not contentment, see? For example, one sort of greed, we talked about greed for material things. Well, contentment will immunize us against this terrible form of greed. We're familiar with 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 8. So having food and clothing, and the footnote adds shelter, we will be content with these things. So contentment really protects us. And in effect, that's what Jehovah was telling Barak. He was telling him, you have what you need. Stop storing up great things or seeking great things. Be content with what you have and do more important things. And then he gave a powerful reason why Barak should do this. Jehovah told him in Jeremiah 45:5, for I'm about to bring a calamity on all flesh. So if you get the mastery over this, I will grant you your life as a spoil. Well, the same applies to us, doesn't it? Jehovah is soon going to bring a calamity on all flesh, and so we need to be content with what we really need and seek first the kingdom. We're just temporary residents, aren't we?
Another thing I wonder about is how much will Steve be donating to the worldwide work of his annual income payments if he does go the route of receiving money instead of just leaving it all with Tim for future investment deals? It's interesting that the mention of tithing has cropped up a number of times in recent talks from headquarters.
And yet here is where the tithe, or the principle of the tithe, comes in. Still, and this is part of that quote from the Watchtower of 2007, December 15, still, he allows us to choose a portion of what we have, a symbolic tithe, to use in his service. It is whatever our circumstances allow, and the second part is touching, and our heart impels us to use. Isn't that wonderful on Jehovah's part? He doesn't set forth a specific requirement. He allows us to display our heartfelt appreciation for him and for all the good things that he does for us.
But the tithing arrangement illustrates something that Jehovah still expects of his people today. Remember, the tithe was to be not just a tenth, but the best tenth of a person's produce and his animals. Jehovah deserves nothing less than our very best.
But what if somebody secretly held back and did not give Jehovah the whole tithe, perhaps giving less than a tenth? How would Jehovah feel about that? Would he be inclined to bless those who were stingy? That's not likely. On the other hand, how would Jehovah feel about those who generously gave even more than a tenth? Well, we don't have to guess. Yes, Jehovah richly blessed faithful ones who generously supported the tithing arrangement.
Now, no speaker has explicitly said that witnesses should or need to tithe, but I don't know, that association is definitely emphasized quite a bit. Now, if we say that Steve's taxes on $100,000 would be 25%, that leaves $75,000 net from which to donate. Although I will say in religions which do practice tithing, like Mormonism, there is a lot of debate over whether you're supposed to tithe on your gross or your net income, with most feeling that a true believer would tithe on the gross income. But for the sake of argument, let's go with tithing on the net. So donating a tenth would be $7,500. I'd be curious to know, is that how much Steve Lett put in the contribution box this year?
Yes, that little box with a slot that is labeled worldwide work.
Would he be willing to tell us the dollar amount he personally donated this year? He said that he's very open to discussing financial matters.
As you might have sensed, I am not shy about this subject.
And he said that even very poor witnesses can and should be donating.
Even in lands with limited resources, the very poor contribute to the cost of their kingdom hall and its maintenance. We're all Jehovah's United people, even if we do not have much materially. If our heart is willing, there is usually something we can do, even if it is merely offering 2 small coins of very little value.
And he said that we should donate without considering what our financial needs might be in the future.
Way before an Israelite knew what kind of a harvest he would have, whether it would be a bumper crop or very meager returns, with full faith and confidence, he was to give the first fruits to Jehovah, not just leftovers at the end of the harvest season. Furthermore, the Hebrew word for first fruit is in the sense of being the best of that early season. So the idea conveyed is not only first chronologically, but also first in quality.
Unfortunately, I am a little doubtful that Steve would ever tell us how much he personally donates. I'm also a bit doubtful, although I'd like to be pleasantly surprised, that he put anywhere near that amount in the contribution box this year. As the saying goes, rules for thee, but not for me. Another thing I wonder about is how Steve's real estate profits jive with the vow of poverty that all Bethelites sign when they get there. This is, for example, the one and only Howie Rutledge trans copy that he signed. I'm specifically wondering about Rule 6 there. I vow to turn over to the local organization of the order all income received from any work or personal efforts in excess of my necessary living expenses, unless released from this vow by the order. Now, on the one hand, this seems incompatible with making money outside Bethel. But on the other hand, I know it is common for just ordinary Bethelites to do little side jobs that they get paid for on their days off, G-jobbing they call it. So it is something where Bethel turns a bit of a blind eye to. But on the other hand, G-jobbing is more like a Bethel waiter being a waiter at a wedding one evening and earning $100. Making $100,000 from selling real estate seems like a little bit of a different story. I don't know. Maybe it just goes back to what we were saying before, that when you're in the committee making the rules get enforced a lot differently.
When we turn the spotlight on abusers, we repeatedly find not only that they come nowhere near the standards they set for others, but that they operate on a completely different set of rules. One that shields them from all of the hardships their targets are expected to endure.
All right, well, that's about it on this video. We'll just have to keep an eye on future real estate wheeling and dealing that Steve Lett does. We know he's still co-owners of that other piece of land down there, so we'll see what they do with that in the next few years. Hey, thanks for watching. Subscribe for more videos coming up, and we'll catch you all in the next one. Take care now.
This tendency toward greed becomes manifest very early. For example, as we see little toddlers grab things and hold them tightly. Mine, mine, mine.